My name is Shelley Shapiro, and I'm Director of Holocaust Survivors and Friends Education Center, and also Director of Community Relations for the United Jewish Federation of Northeastern New York. I am so proud to be here tonight to begin our program with Rabbi Robert Kassman of Congregation Avodat Haim, our hosts.
Welcome to Congregation Avodat Haim. It is our privilege to host this event. By doing so, by being a Jewish community, honoring two individuals who saved Jewish lives and who became known to the world, how their heroism helped some individual Jews and thereby saved the Jewish community. We hope, too, to represent the people of the world, honoring those whose heroism saves lives. Because although these two names deservedly deserve honor, and those they saved truly are people whose merit in the world has been gained by those whose heroism saved them, they're also people who are not acknowledged and people who were saved who don't have communities to recognize it. So it's our privilege to honor all heroes at this time.
Rabbi Deborah Gordon is President of the Capital District Board of Rabbis.
In your program is printed a quotation, but it's really an interesting misquotation. I'm going to quote you the original. We'll come around to the misquotation at the end. Kol hamakayim nefesh achat miYisrael ke'ilu kiyam olam maleh. Talmud says this at least twice that I could find. Thank goodness for searchable databases. Whoever saves, rescues, upholds one life in Israel, one Jewish life, it's as if they have saved, rescued, upheld an entire world. One of the places this appears in the Talmud is in the context of cautioning witnesses to get them to testify only to the truth. And it goes on to say, "L'fichach kol echad ve'echad chayad lomar bishvili nivra ha'olam." Therefore, and this is part of how the witnesses were cautioned, every person should say, "It is for my sake that the world was created." What an amazing statement. That to tell the witnesses that they should consider themselves as the purpose for creation, that their lives are that valuable, is intended to inculcate in them a sense of the value of every human life. And there's so much wisdom in this, that to value yourself, to recognize yourself as a full human being at its best, causes you to reach out and recognize all other human beings as full and valuable selves as well. And of course, both these statements go back to the idea that in the beginning, one human being was created. So if you save one human being, it's like saving a whole world. If, on the other hand, you allow one human being to be destroyed, it's like destroying the whole world. And similarly, it's as if you were that one first human, and for you, the world was created. But of course, in your program, it's printed as it is much more commonly quoted. Whoever saves a single life, it's as though they had saved a whole world. The original says a single Jewish life. And in here, too, there is a teaching for us. For although we are here to honor parents and grandparents who saved Jewish lives, in each generation, we take those teachings that were taught us by our families, by our communities, by our culture, our religion, our society, and we try it and make them just a little bit better. We try and pass them on with some new wisdom. So 1,500 years ago, it was quite sufficient for the Talmud to say, whoever saves a Jewish life, it's as though they had saved a world. But for us today, we added just a little more. Whoever saves any human life, it is as though they had saved a world. May each one of us continue to receive the traditions in our family, to pass them on, refined and purified, so that each one of us may have that wonderful self-confidence that comes from knowing the world was created for our sake, and knowing that indeed the world was created for the sake of each human being whose face we look into.
Right now, I'd like to light a memorial candle by survivors of the Holocaust. And I'd like some help, all my guys that read the program really well, so they stand up. I'd like all survivors to come forward, and maybe Kathy will assist me with this so I don't burn the place down. Would survivors stand in the audience and come forward so that we can light a memorial candle in memory of all survivors, of all those who were lost?
Please rise. And with me to acknowledge the holiness inherent in life and in the mystery of death. Gadal v'izkadash she'nerava, ve'amad v'yirah v'yuseh v'yamikma v'chayachom v'metom v'yeh v'olei Yisrael v'adalah v'zman harim Yetesh Rabba Barak Dalam Isbarak Ishtabak Isbar Israman Isnaseh Isadar Isalel Isalah Shem Shalom Ve'eva Mikol Chasa Shiraza Tushta Chasa Damiran Dama Yetesh Rabba Ishmaya Chaim Avenu Be'al Kol Yisrael Oseh Shalom Yiraseh Shalom Avenu Be'al Kol Yisrael
And now Kathy Kushner, who is Chair of the Israel and World Affairs Committee of the Community Relations Council of the Jewish Federation.
It is my pleasure and privilege to introduce to you tonight Consul Yael Bilan. Consul Bilan comes to us from New York, where he serves as the Consul for Public Affairs at the Consulate General of Israel in New York. Immediately prior to taking his post in New York, he had served as the first Secretary of Political Administration and Consul at the Israeli Embassy in Hanoi, Vietnam. I know for me, thinking about Israel having a consulate in Vietnam is a new idea, something that I would have considered quite interesting. I think we're very lucky here in the Northeast to have access to officials like Consul Bilan, who can share with us on an occasion like this. And we're asking him tonight to present to our honoree the medal for the righteous among the nations. And I invite Council Milan to come forward now.
Good evening, and I would like to thank all of you who came here today. And I must tell you, I'm traveling quite a lot in the last year that I'm here, and I think I still haven't been in such occasion, which instead of talking about Arafat, I had to deal with much more important, I think, significant issues like the evening we have tonight, which for me, as a grandchild of Holocaust survivors, again, I can't think of any more significant or more noble task that I will ever have to deal with as an Israeli diplomat than what we are having tonight. And you know, Rabbi just talked before about this noble sentence that we all know from our Jewish tradition, and based on these ideas of Kol Matzil Nefesh, whoever who is rescuing one soul is like rescued the entire world. The state of Israel, since 1963, have granted more than 90,000 righteous among the nations awards to people who risked their own life and rescued Jews all around Europe. And it's a real privilege for me to present today both the certificate, which I will shortly read what's in there, and this medal of honor to the son and the grandson of Dr. Helmut himself and his wife. And I really want to thank you. Our tradition also said that Zchut Avot is Siman Levanim, and if I need to translate, it's like the good deeds of the father is a sign for the son or the next generations. So it's a real honor for me to be here today as the representative of the state of Israel and to present you this award. I also want to acknowledge the fact that we have a representative of the German consulate here today with us, which again is something that I'm sure the people who your father rescued some 6 years ago would never believe that this day will ever arrive. So I think it's a very important and significant day for all of us, Jews, Gentiles, Germans, Israelis, human beings in general. So I think I'd like to read this certificate of honor. This is to certify that in its session of May 28, 1981, the Commission for the Designation of the Righteous established by Yad Vashem the Holocaust Heroes and Martyrs Remembrance Authority of the basis of evidence presented before it has decided to honor Dr. Helmut and Annemarie, who during the Holocaust period in Europe risked their life to save persecuted Jews. The Commission therefore has accorded them the Medal of the Righteous among the nations. Their names shall be forever engraved on the honor wall in the Garden of the Righteous at Yad Vashem, Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Israel, June 7th, 2001. Here we have the medal in the same sentence like we have already heard. כל המקיים נפש אחת כאילו קיים עולם מלא.
I'm of course grateful and a little bit proud about this episode of my life. Of course, the real memories are Annemarie, Helmut, and my parents. I do want to thank the State of Israel, and especially Dr. Ezra Ben Gershon, who has never forgotten my parents and who has honored them to this great extent. I regret that Dr. Ben Gershon is not here to join us. He had tickets already to come, but because of worsening health, he had to cancel his flight. I also want to thank Israeli Consul Yael Milan and the German Consul Stefan Schlüter. And above all, I also want to thank Shelley Shapiro for preparing the whole event and organizing it. Actually, it's almost by coincidence that my oldest son found the name of the righteous in a book that we bought, written by Herbert Stratton. It's an interesting book about other Germans under Hitler, and it illustrates case histories of people from all walks of life who helped. We had a lot of Jewish friends. I grew up in an area where actually there was no problem or difference. And we had a music meeting. My mother made chamber music. There were also a couple of violinists who happened to be Jewish and a singer. And things happened. They did get out in time. And our parents taught us children, I think, fairly early about the racial theories of the Nazis and what nonsense they really were. We lived in the middle of Europe, and of course, we are descendants of many races. And they also taught us that anti-Semitism is actually evil. So, I saw helping Jews or other persecuted people as being expectable and normal for my parents, and as a child, you are not afraid, you are not aware of the dangers they took. Actually, our family did help together. There was a family friend, Dr. Mischler, who forged passports and ID papers for people. My Swiss aunt and uncle harbored apparently a lot of Jews in their rather garden at the end of the street, kind of difficult to look into. And my dad would come over there and he would always make sure that the telephone was bugged. In 1943 we had Dr. Ben Gershon with us, and another gentleman, a young man, who wrote to us from Spain, a postcard that he got out. And then in early 1944, my dad's secretary, with her Jewish husband, apparently quite officially moved into our home in Potsdam. And he probably didn't report him as being Jewish, but he had to register him at any rate. Unfortunately, Dr. Lubowski was arrested later. Dr. Lubowski was an attorney, and he was invited by letter. He was conscripted to work as a porter at a railroad station in Berlin. And then a number of weeks after that, he was arrested and placed into a concentration camp in a village called Speer, about 12 kilometers from our home. And Mrs. Dubowski and my mother did what they could, packed packages, and I brought them out on my Stalin and Truman actually lived in our street. But we had to be out in 30 minutes. The Russians loaded us on trucks, and things hadn't dumped us a few miles away. And so we survived. Even before the war, my father predicted that all Germans would one day pay for the crimes of the Nazis. After the war, life was quite difficult for my parents. My dad built radio sets and sold them initially. We got out with a freight train to the west, with a British freight train, giving a fictitious address in the British sector of Berlin, and from there we got out to the west. And then he started a small firm again near Stuttgart in Esslingen. And when it was financially very difficult, and then when his new secretary got ill, my mother learned to keep the books, and that saved money. And then I started to study medicine. And I'm a little bit ashamed asking my dad for money. At that time, he really took excellent care of us. And my dad died in 56. And suddenly he had a pulmonary embolus. He tried to mail a letter to my wife and me, and was hit by a motorcycle. And my mother still successfully actually ran the firm for a number of years herself. And she died in 1971. So, since I'm German, I've never been able to get away from the horrors that the Germans committed. I've never been able to visit Auschwitz or Buchenwald or Bergen-Belsen or any of the other camps we drank about it. The award which my parents now receive is of course of great importance to me and to my sister as well, and our children and grandchildren. And so I want to thank you again in the name of our whole family for this award.
For 18 years, I have tried to share with teachers and students the meaning of mass murder, the meaning of choice, and the meaning of trying to make the kinds of decisions that Helmut and Annemarie's cell made on one day when a Jewish boy came to them. I wanted as much of the story to be there for you to read, so it keeps on going to the back of the program. But it's just a small, tiny little part of the story of Ezra Ben Gershon, who proposed the award. You might wonder why it was awarded in 1981, and Dr. Sell referred a little bit to the fact that they only discovered, by chance, Bill Sell discovered the name in the back of a book and then contacted Yad Vashem. They met Ezra Ben Gershon, and we're here today. The story also includes Anita Schmager, who was a young girl who was friends with the Sells. She'd like to share a little bit of her story with you tonight. And Carl Rosner, I guess, is going to assist us in making it into English. Anita. Carl Rosner is a survivor of Buchenwald, born in Germany.
Sehr geehrte Anwesende, es ist für mich eine große Ehre, hier in der ehrwürdigen Synagoge über unsere Vergangenheit in der Nazizeit zu berichten. Es war eine große Freude, als ich von meinem Schulfreund erfuhr, dass hier heute diese große Ehrung für seine Eltern vorgenommen wird. Ja.
I suggested rather than waiting till she has her whole speech that I would translate paragraph by paragraph. I'll be happy to do that. Ms. Schmeger is a Jewish woman who survived in Germany. She's the daughter of a Jewish mother and a German father, and benefited from being neighbors of the cells. She's saying it's a great honor for her to come to this place of honor and report about her past during the Nazi regime. She is very pleased that my classmate, Dr. Sell, told me that today there would be a ceremony to honor his parents, and she especially came from Germany to participate with him in accepting this honor.
Okay. Familie Dr. Sell nahm uns in ihren Freundeskreis auf, obwohl meine Mutter Jüdin war. Für uns war es eine große Erleichterung, so gute Nachbarn zu haben. Wir mussten aus einem großen Haus ausziehen und in dieses kleine Nachbarhaus ziehen, wegen der dauernden Belästigung meiner Mutter. Machen Sie doch, dass Sie nach Palästina kommen.
Dr. Sell and his family accepted us as friends and as neighbors, even though my mother was Jewish. For us, it was a great relief to have such good neighbors and friends. We had to move out of our large house to a much smaller house, which happened to be the neighbor adjacent to the cells, because in a large building there was constant harassment that my mother received as a Jew, and they told her to get out and go to Palestine.
Als Verfolgte der Nazizeit weiß ich, wie viel Mut und Menschlichkeit dazu gehörte, jüdische Menschen aufzunehmen. Auch wir mussten uns den Nürnberger Gesetzen fügen. Telefon, Radio, großes Segelschiff wurde eingezogen. Menschen jüdischer Abstammung durften ihre Lehre nicht beenden. Ich wurde aus der Schule ausgestoßen. Vater sollte sich scheiden lassen, und da er sich weigerte, bekam er eine Einberufung zur Organisation TOT. Unsere Ärztin, Frau Dr. Helfers, machte ihn mit einer Spritze untauglich und rettete ihn damit vor dem Arbeitslager.
As a victim of Nazi persecution, I know how much courage and humanity it took to harbor fellow human beings who were Jewish. Like all the rest of us, we had to obey the Nuremberg laws. Our telephone, radio, and our large sailing ship were confiscated. Jews were not allowed to complete their education and studies. I was actually expelled from school, and my father was ordered to divorce my mother so that my mother could be deported. And when he refused, he was ordered to report to the organization TOG, which was a military construction and work organization. However, our doctor, Dr. Helfers, gave him an injection to incapacitate him. Thus, he saved him from the work camp and saved us from being sent to Theresienstadt.
Und uns dadurch vor der Verschickung nach Theresienstadt. Dann mussten wir in die Illegalität gehen. 1945 fanden wir unser Wohngebiet für die Potsdamer Konferenz von den Russen besetzt. Ich traf meinen Schulfreund erst 1999 in Potsdam-Babelsberg wieder. Ich hätte mir gewünscht, dass es solche Familie Dr. Sell mehr gegeben hätte. Ich danke für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit. Shalom.
Following these activities, we had to live illegally for the rest of the war. And in 1945, the Russians occupied our neighborhood in Potsdam, Berlin. And as was indicated earlier, all inhabitants were expelled to make room for Stalin and so forth. I did not meet my classmate, Dr. Sell, again until 1999. It was an accident, actually, and coincident, in that I visited Berlin after having lived in Dresden for 40 years and came to Berlin to look for my old neighborhood. And I found a house in the old neighborhood that had a name plaque of cells. I rang the bell, and through a coincidence, Dr. Seltz, who actually lived in Schenectady, was just visiting. He opened the door and we recognized each other in 1999, and since then we've maintained contact with each other. Thank you very much for your attention and interest. Ms. Frager wanted to add another sentence in that I would have wished that there were more families like the Sells. Unfortunately, there were very few such unusual people in Germany. I can attest to that myself. Thank you.
The last word was shalom. Jerry Hahn was born in Germany and escaped to Luxembourg as a child and lived out the majority of the war in London. Jerry will introduce the German consul.
Thank you, Shelley. As Shelley indicated, I was among the fortunate who was able to get away in time. We left Germany in June of 1938. I'm pleased to introduce Stefan Schlüter. Notice his umlaut on the U, Schlüter. And by coincidence, Stefan was born about 25 miles away from where I was born. I was born in Karlsruhe. He was born in Baden-Baden. I'm always sort of been fascinated by the name Baden-Baden. I mean, by and perhaps you can explain why we have no two names there. It's glad we're not in Schenectady. Mr. Schlüter's had an illustrious career after graduating from the University of Hamburg and the German Foreign Service. He really went to work. He's had assignments in Argentina, in Algeria, most notably from 1986 to 1990 in Israel, where incidentally one of his two children was born. He went back on to Bonn, then to Los Angeles, then back to Bonn and Berlin, and currently he's Deputy Consul General in New York. Stefan Schlüter.
Jerry, I'm afraid you caught me there. I couldn't explain to you why it's Baden-Baden, 2 times Baden. It's a bath, and a resort place, but why it's Baden-Baden, I really can't tell you. I'm sorry. Dr. Zell, Mr. Schmager, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we are coming together here to honor a couple, to pay tribute to a couple that 6 years ago in Nazi Germany had a choice, and they took the right path. Like many others, Helmut and Annemarie Zell were opposed to the Nazi regime, but they chose to follow their conscience and stood up against the persecution of their fellow Jewish citizens. And they did so, as everybody knows, at a considerable risk of themselves being arrested and all the way to the camps. Now, as a German diplomat, I'm truly honored and privileged to attend tonight's event. While serving in Israel, you mentioned I was in Israel from 1986 to 1990, 3.5 years. I have been many times up to Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, and every visit being as emotional as the first one. The two sites of Yad Vashem have always been very, very special to me, and I try to include them in every visit. One is the most moving Holocaust monument that I've ever seen. It's the small but I think incredibly touching Children's Memorial. And the other is the Avenue of the Righteous Among the Nations. Now, while the Children's Memorial gives testimony to 1.5 million Jewish children who perished in the Holocaust, the Avenue, as well as the Garden of the Righteous Among the Nations, offers hope, as every name that is inscribed there points to one, or in many cases to many individuals who have been saved. Now, Inge Deutschkron, she's a German Jew who survived the persecution and the war in the underground in Berlin, as Mrs. Schmager did. She moved to Israel after the war, became a journalist. That's where I met her. She was working for Marie. And around 1990, she moved back to Berlin, and since then divided her time between Berlin and Tel Aviv, living about 6 months every year in Berlin and 6 months in Tel Aviv. She wrote a very successful theater play that has been watched and visited, I think, by nearly every school class in Berlin and even in Germany. And it's based on her previously published memoirs, I Wore the Yellow Star. And she once told me that at least, there are no exact numbers, but at least 2,000, if not many more, Jews survived the war and the Holocaust and the persecution in the underground, as submarines as they were called at that time. And she said that, and this was only a rule of thumb, but that was the case in her case and in many other cases, she said that for every Jew that was saved, you needed a network of about at least 10, sometimes 15 people, because you had to change the lodging, you had to change where they stayed because neighbors might become suspicious, so you had to change. You had to take care of the transport. There were only food stamps for everybody that time, so somebody had to give their food stamps so they could have something to eat and get something there. So if you take this, it showed that there were probably 20, 30,000 Berliners, just in Berlin, who somewhat, to some extent, some more than others, helped their Jewish citizens. And some of them, I don't want to hide this from you, some of them did this for money, for material gain, they asked to be paid for that. But many did this just like your parents, because they simply followed their conscience as caring humans who lived up to the values and displayed a great deal of civil courage for them. Now, the initiative of Yad Vashem of the State of Israel to honor these courageous individuals is an important one. And it carries one aspect which goes well beyond the recognition of these individuals. It conveys a very important message that should be heard and taken to heart by everyone. And that is that as an individual, you can refuse to bow to pressure. You can and you muster the strength to follow your conscience, and most important of all, you can make a difference. Thank you very much.
Perhaps what has been said here tonight is what we all try to teach our children, our grandchildren, and every school child in our region. And that is the legacy of hope for the future, that perhaps each and every one of us can make a better world. We have the power. Tonight's program came to us because of two doctors, Drs. Arnold Ritterban and Dr. Clifford Tepper. They wanted to have an event. And I said, of course we will have an event. Because this is the third such Righteous Among the Nations that is unbelievably presented in the capital region. unbelievably, that we would have righteous among us. And so, Drs. Arnold Ritterband and Dr. Clifford Tepper would like to say a few words in closing before our program concludes tonight.
Well, when Arnie and I heard about this attempt to reach Steve, we got together with him and we talked to him and listened to his story. And each time we met him, a little bit more would come out. I would just tingle. Said to Steve, we have to share this. Steve said, me, I'm a reserved person. I really don't want any publicity. And so we negotiated, and we negotiated, and we negotiated, and he retreated. I've known Steve since the 50s. I was privileged to be a pediatrician to his children. And the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And Steve was a wonderful physician, a fine person, an asset to our community. And I'm very, very proud to have known a man whose parents were so wonderful and a man who was wonderful himself.
The first inkling I had that I was to speak on the program tonight was when my wife handed me the program. In around 1953 and 1954, I was a resident in pathology at Mount Sinai Hospital, and on the next bench with his own microscope was a young Japanese. We became friendly and exchanged stories of what our lives had been like before we came to Mount Sinai. And I told him that I'd gone into the Navy in 1944, been trained as an electronic technician, and had been assigned to the aircraft carrier Midway, which was expected to participate in the invasion of Japan. And he had a kind of strange reaction to that. He explained to me that he had been drafted out of medical school, where he had been in the early part of the war, and had some flying experience, and had been converted into a kamikaze pilot. And I had this strange feeling that here, sitting beside me, was a guy who was planning to crash his plane into the smokestack of the aircraft carrier that I was on, and was going to participate in the invasion. What brings this to mind is that I remembered met Steve, that I liked him immediately. I thought he was a person of intelligence and character, but I had a new fantasy about him, and the fantasy was, why did he come to the United States to practice? And the first fantasy I concocted was that his father was a Nazi general, and that he was embarrassed about it and decided he didn't want to stay in Germany. After getting to know Steve better, I had to discard that fantasy. It was obvious from his character, from his behavior. He was not the son of a Nazi general. Church has said that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and I certainly agree with that. In the program, and this evening, a number of people have spoken of the fact that his parents had a choice. Steve's comment on that to me, I think, was very characteristic of him. He said they didn't have any choice. They had no choice at all. They had to do what they did. And I believe it. Steve is a worthy son of very worthy parents, and we are very grateful to Helmut, Maurice, to their sons, to their grandchildren. We're privileged to be here tonight.
A wonderful new book has come out on the Holocaust by Deborah Dwork and Robert Jan van Pelt. For all these years, I've tried to figure out how can we best explain the murder, the genocide during the Holocaust. The efforts of the cells and thousands of others like them are endeavors that clearly illuminate how people transcended the hardships they endured each day and organized help for others and for themselves. Of the German rule at the time under the Nazis, it was possible to circumvent difficulties and negotiate obstacles. Not everyone stood by silently. Not everyone participated in genocide. Why are the rescuers significant in the largest mass murder of people? What do the words rescue mean? While the Holocaust was the most lethal, most geographically comprehensive genocide in the history of Western civilization, the heroes were the rescuers and those who resisted. Thus, it is possible for each and every one of us, to rescue, to resist, to make a better world. Right now we get to hear back air on the G string, played by Arabeth chamber players, because Helmut and Annemarie Sal loved music, and we honor them by hearing music they love. thanks to the Arabeth Chamber players, Elizabeth Silver on violin, Kristen Tutman on piano, Erica Pinkard on cello, who will be playing during the reception. Thank you to Bill Self for helping us provide their beautiful music for us to enjoy. Tonight, I ask you to not only remember, but to make this a time when you learn more about it. As an old teacher, I can't give it up. There's 2 books. There's a book called David, which is the story of Ezra ben Gershom, available still, published in the 1970s, but available still, which tells the story of the survival of Ezra ben Gershom. A whole section of it is about Helmut and Annemarie Sell and his period of time when he worked for the Sell family. David, which is the film made from this book by Peter Lilienthal, is still available as well and used in a German studies class, by the way, by a friend of mine in Central Missouri State in Warrensburg, Missouri. Anytime you want more information on rescue or on the Holocaust, Holocaust Survivors and Friends Education Center in Latham, I'd be happy to provide it to you. Our website is www.holocausteducation.org. Thank you again for coming out tonight to pay tribute to Helmut and Annemarie Sell, and please come and meet everyone at the reception in the room right next to this. Good night.